was no knock on the door. So, that's when I started really putting it together, the whole thesis of governments are now heavily involved in the monetary metal, which is gold, but they're also going to be involved in the other critical minerals, such as silver, and we're now seeing it. And so that was, I believe, that there were phone calls made before Trump even got into office, and the banks started firing up what I would call mercantile banking. So we're going back to, and right now we're in a world where certain countries are not trading very well, but they will hire banks and they sit in the middle, and the banks are acquiring resources and then they're trading it, amongst each other. But who is their end customer? It is actual government.
Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Well, I have a new guest today, Josh Phair. He's founder and CEO of Scottsdale Mint. He's also co-founder and CEO of the Wyoming Reserve Opportunity Zone Fund Corporation. Welcome to the channel, Josh.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on, and we follow each other on X, and I enjoy your comments and very interesting comments you make about the precious metals and what's going on. And you have your finger on the pulse because you have a mint, and I guess you store a lot of gold and silver as well. Is that what you do?
Yeah, so it's actually two companies. I'm the only person that has a dual hat. So I'm CEO of both companies. On the vaulting side, I don't run that business. I essentially set it up. We've got another team, so that's a totally separate balance sheets, audits, everything totally different. But it is that company is in located in the same building. We're in just over 60,000 square feet now, an entire depository that we're in that's in continual construction. So if you hear a little noise behind me from time to time, I'm actually on the manufacturing side right now behind the glass here in Wyoming.
Yeah, and you've been saying some interesting things. I've seen you on other channels. I've seen you with Andy Scheckman, who I know well from Miles Franklin. And also, you were talking recently of the fact that a lot of gold is flowing into the US, which is really unusual. And you know that because you have good contacts with the airlines that ship the gold. And last year in January, I'm going to bring up an article that came out, and it was January 29th, 2025, and it came out in the FT. It was the first time it came out, and I saw this story, gold stockpiling in New York leads to London shortage. And there was at the time 4 to 8 weeks to deliver spot gold, which at the time I made a video here, this one here, Bank of England delays gold delivery for up to 8 weeks. At the time, Josh, gold was around 2,700, and it's one of my top videos. I got 15,000 views, and it was like the second of the day. I usually only make one, and I thought it was really significant because I've never seen the Bank of England delay delivery for so long. And it started like after the election of Donald Trump, all this physical gold going through. And I did a video at the time about Scott Bessent. He was interviewed as a hedge fund manager just around the time of the election. And he said that he was a gold bug and that the United States needed some kind of orchestrate world monetary like reset. So, what do you think? Do you remember this story from last year? And how does that like segue into what's happening, still happening now with gold going to the US?
Yeah, so that was obviously, so he made those comments originally before his name was even floated, to go into the government. But I think it shows his background, and even just look at the Oval Office today. It is gold everywhere. You could say it's almost too much. However, it is there. I think it's a little bit mimetic, actually, of what's taking place. If we know the system is cooked, and I think Scott knew that when he made the comment, he clearly knows that now that he's in the government. I think what we're watching is a controlled demolition of the financial system, and it's starting to move a little faster. Trump knows where it's probably going to go, and he's pushing the accelerator, it feels like. And yeah, so I didn't even have a social media account until sometime in January. I think was my first post, and it was on this exact topic, January of last year, 25. And a lot of people didn't know who I was, and there was nothing to back. Everybody was like, "Prove it that all this gold is coming to the U.S." And to your point, my company is bringing in, we're importing from these same markets. I'm using the same armed carriers. We're using the same planes. We're doing a lot of these same similar activities, and I'm competing and I'm seeing it, and there's no availability for flights. And I can tell you, so most most of the large legs, let's say the London to New York flight, there's high value waivers that certain airlines have. So not every airplane that's flying in between locations have high value waivers, but a lot do. It's a think of a way, an airplane can be more, they'll sell their freight. But typically they don't sell freight for, normal things, but they love to, hey, if they can throw some gold on an airplane, it's added revenue. And then during Christmas, the planes are full because people are doing holiday travels. And so I'm hearing all this gold moving. And then sure enough, and I think that's what kind of kicked off my X account, because I called it and I'm like, hey, there's so much gold coming here. Who's the buyer? Now, if you ask AI and you look at it, it still says that the gold came to the US because of tariff concerns. Now, is
I
that a
don't buy
component?
that.
Me neither. I think I think that's a legitimate excuse, and where there's some, but gold. I think we saw the moment that U.S. Customs was even potentially there was a concern. Trump put out an emergency order to clear gold, that it has no tax. So this is, I think, an interesting thing to think about. And then we did see the delays out of London, significant delays. And I can say that right now there's significant delays all over again from vaults, not just in London, but all over the world. There's so much metal moving jurisdictionally in and out that the things that normally would take 1 to 2 days to schedule a truck to move is typically 2 weeks from date of it being available. So, and I think I mentioned on another one, flights out of certain markets in Europe are between 3 to 4x the normal price per pound. So if you're doing a shipment from, let's say, Frankfurt into the US, you're paying, and now the airlines are going out to bid. So you have to bid on your conveyance to get on that airplane. If not, you keep getting pushed out. So the demand's so high, but if we go back a year ago, London was getting pressured and it was disrupting the markets. They had to put out statements, what's going on. There was a lot of concern. And I would say my take would be is any time that an individual or a company is meddling, participating in markets that disrupt the markets, you get a knock on the door. So if you go back into the 80s, it was the Hunt brothers with silver. In the 90s, you had George Soros, the first, and then he got slapped. You had Warren Buffett a few years later. He said, I'll give it a go. He got slapped. And so if this was a bank or a consumer, you're going to get a knock on the door. They say, hey, cut it out because you're disrupting various markets. And so Bank of England's obviously tied in, with the major exchanges such as the COMEX as well, separate but partners. So there was no knock on the door. So, that's when I started really putting it together, the whole thesis of governments are now heavily involved in the monetary metal, which is gold, but they're also going to be involved in the other critical minerals such as silver, and we're now seeing it. And so that was, I believe, that there were phone calls made before Trump even got into office, and the banks started firing up what I would call mercantile banking. So we're going back to, and right now we're in a world where certain countries are not trading very well, but they will hire banks and they sit in the middle, and the banks are acquiring resources and then they're trading it, amongst each other. But who is their end customer? It is actual governments. And so this is what's causing it. And what has made gold go up so fast, and I would say so consistent, to where anytime it gets a pullback, it's bought. So here we are today. We're on March 3rd. We had a pretty big whack. Gold went down, just broke, just below 5,000. We're right back up another $100. Now that's not to say it can't go any lower, but it seems like there are buyers in the market that didn't exist, years ago, and they're not just your normal players.
I agree with you about getting a slap and a call from the government or the regulators if you start buying too much gold or silver. So I had the same thought as you that it could be for the government. And there are people as well speculating that USA Tether, they're buying a lot of gold, physical gold. They're buying royalty companies. And the CEO of USA Tether, he worked for the Trump administration up until last year.
Bo Hines, yeah.
Yeah, Bill Hines. So some people, I think it was Andy Schectman as well. He speculated that they're buying through the back door for the Treasury. So my question is, do you think the Treasury is buying the gold? Because I've always speculated as well, and many other people, that the gold at Fort Knox and West Point that's held for the Treasury has been leased out many times over, and that's why there hasn't been an audit. So now, if gold is moving around so much now, that means that something's going to happen, because up until 2 years ago, gold never moved unless it was Germany asking for some of their gold back because the people wanted some of the gold back. So yeah. So do you think the U.S. knows something's going to change, so they need to bring the gold back? And also, there's been speculation, that the 2,300 tons that China says it has is not the real number. It's more like 30,000. So could the U.S. be? Yeah. First question: Are they buying, bringing back their leases, so to speak, or are they also adding even more to maybe match the Chinese?
Um, yeah, this is a deep one. I'd say there's a lot of nuances to this. So I'll go. Let me start with the reporting, because people look at central bank buying that's reported, and that's it's a self report. You say, here's what we did. Um, And then governments, and I would say, let's focus on China. We know for a fact that China has created a lot of other entities, structures that are unreported. So I like to call that OTC, over the counter, meaning it's just being purchased through another avenue. And a lot of that could be through banks. China is basically instructing the insurance companies to buy gold. So you can buy gold in so many different fashions that is unreported. And I would say, if an entity or an institution or whoever wants to buy a lot of it, you don't make it too obvious. It's a great example would be, you're someone that has come into a lot of capital in your local community, and you want to buy a lot of real estate in a zip code. You typically have some straw buyers. You don't want to go out there and say, hey, Jimmy over here is buying up all the land. The moment he calls, the price goes up. So things are done pretty quietly, until it's kind of known. So I would say that's definite, and I'd say that is, the World Gold Council would agree with that. And so they talk about the reported and unreported buying, and kind of estimates of how much is there. I'd say probably the same thing. People are kind of focused on, is the gold in Fort Knox or not? And I think I kind of chuckle, because it might not be there, it might be there. But I do know this about Trump and Elon Musk, is I don't think they typically ask questions to the public that they don't know the answer to. So that's my thinking. And could perhaps Fort Knox have been pillaged or leased out, or but it doesn't necessarily have to go back into the same building. It could go into another entity, another vehicle. And frankly, would you want to tell? I mean, I kind of joke about this sometimes, but if you've seen James Bond Goldfinger, the topic of that was, hey, we're going to let off a nuclear bomb, inside Fort Knox, which would basically make it, I forget what was it a decade that the gold there would be radioactive and couldn't be sold, making the gold price of Goldfinger's holdings go way up. Well, so you don't always want to show people what you're doing. It wouldn't shock me if the U.S. government, and I don't know anything that has, but it wouldn't shock me if they're in it. I would also go back to the late December, around Christmas time, before Trump took office. He put out a tweet. It was a warning shot to China and the BRICS to not create a new currency and to not back it. No one in the mainstream media didn't cover that, especially the backing. Back it with what? So he's talking gold. So I do personally, my personal macro view is there's an economic reset coming. Scott was correct. We have the World Economic Forum people that talk about it. Everybody knows there's some form of a reset. The question is what does that look like? Is this good for the common man? Is this terrible for the common man? So I think there's variations of this that are very concerning and scary. And and I think there's definitely a battle over that. So to think that, I feel like it's not even a conspiracy. This is just like critical thinking that, yeah, China has been buying gold heavily, as have a lot of the BRICS. They're building vault systems to create settlement layers, for trade amongst themselves. All across the globe, this is being done. I know that for a fact. So if we start thinking about it, yeah, the critical thinking would be whoever owns the most gold may control the next reset, but you also have to have a military to protect it. And I think we're watching that in real life motion, really all over the world, where control of minerals is most definitely paramount. And it's both the above ground stocks, but it's also the flow of the below ground. And so banks right now are entering the arena on behalf of governments, and they're financing the mines. And you may not even know who the end buyer of that material will be once the mining company sells that material. So this is also why refineries are backed up all over the world, because I would say is they are very busy for the big players. Cost to refine has gone up. Obviously, the cost per ounce is up. There's not, liquidity is being strained, and jurisdiction matters. And so I would say, to your point about why is gold moving, is the old adage of possession's 9/10 of the law. You're right. It sure is. And so I think people are saying, hey, I don't want it at the Bank of England, which was that was settled. England was the power player of the world for quite some time. And at the end of World War II, the gold, the debts of the war debts, a lot of it was settled right there at the Bank of England. And that has been the leasing system, the pledge system of the World Bank, IFC. It's how they financed impoverished nations and give them loans. And the question would be well, where is Europe going to be? And I think there's a lot of concern. Obviously, England broke off from the EU. And I would say is Trump and Starmer are not, I wouldn't say they're super friendly, is a good way to put it. And yeah, it wouldn't shock me if Trump's like, hey, let's put our gold over here. And Germany is saying, hey, we don't want it in England. We don't want it in the US. We want it in our land. And China's saying, well, we want it over here. And clearly, it's kind of a wise thought, because the Ukraine war, when the Russian assets were seized, was kind of a wake-up call to the rest of the world that says, hey, could this happen to my assets?
So before we proceed further with the interview, I just want to give a shout out to Dirty Man Safe. So with traditional safes, their so-called advantage is that criminals can't break into them. But Dirty Man Safe is different. Its advantage is that it's undetectable. So they can't even try to break into it. And that's only one of the many features of Dirty Men Safe. They provide three different sizes, and you can bury your gold coins, silver coins, bars, important documents, jewelry, and anything that's valuable for you. So yeah, Dirty Men Safe is affordable, convenient, provides you peace of mind, confidentiality, and sustainability. So if you want to find out more, there's a link below in the description. It will take you to a landing page. And if you use that link, you get 10% off if you were to decide to buy a Dirty Man Safe. And they ship it to Europe as well, not just the United States.
And so the rest of the world says we got to create a more trustless system that's out there. So yeah, assets are moving to jurisdictions all over the world that maybe weren't a major player. So we hear in the crypto, the digital, you hear the word decentralization. And so I would say there's a physical decentralization taking place right now away from not just London, but also New York. So and vaults are out of insurance limits there, and we're moving it. And I would say, Dubai holds a lot of gold and silver. I think we've seen just the last couple of days, how do people that are vaulting there feel? An errant missile hits. It's in a different, and I mean, we all could say, you look on the map and you say, well, you're just, I mean, you can see Iran from Dubai. So, and I've stayed in some of the hotels that are now being hit. So you're like, yeah, that's not the safest jurisdiction for a few reasons. So I think this is pretty wild to watch. Someone said, "Oh, I was on another." He's like, he's really giddy. I'm not giddy about the problems in the world. It's exciting to watch when things are happening. And you have your war board of what you think could potentially happen. And Josh is not a genius by any means, and I don't know everything. But when you start seeing things happen and come together that kind of jive with your whole thesis, that's why I moved my company to Wyoming and started that process during COVID lockdowns 5 years ago. So now we're watching where jurisdiction matters, go where you're treated best. And now I'm watching all the pieces of the puzzle start to unravel, and actually unravel, and then they're coming together. And it's, what is this going to look like in 4 to 6 years? It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned that Trump, I think it was in December, you said recently, that he warned China and BRICS not to back their currency with anything. Of course, it would be gold. Do you think he said that because he wants them to wait for the US to get enough gold so they can set up the system together?
That would be my guess.
Yeah, yeah,
That would be my guess. And clearly, he doesn't want a competitor to the US dollar. And right now, the US dollar is in very high demand. People want to use it. However, a lot of people aren't wanting to keep buying the treasuries either. So you kind of have this, I would call it, we use the term in the media calls it the debasement term. But the reality is the last year, what's really been debased? It people still want the dollar. So it's not a full, it might be a long term, but if we look in the short term, the dollar has been weak against the EU, against a lot of the other currencies since Trump's taken office. And I think that's more of a strategic, economic trade scenario. But there is huge dollar demand. But the question is what is that going to look like long term? If the dollar's cooked, then the next question is what currency do you feel comfortable with? And there really is none. Even, the Swiss franc has been pretty darn strong, but could that be the world currency? And it's the economy
mm,
that's behind it. It can't.
yeah,
Do you trust the Chinese? The Chinese don't even trust their own selves. There's always the Communist Party of China is always under threat within their own party. So yeah, there's going to have to be a whole new system. And whether, we're not going to probably be at the grocery store using gold bars and coins to buy things, but is gold going to be the underpinning of potentially a whole new system? And perhaps, I'd
yeah.
say I don't know what other asset you would be looking at, because Bitcoin is not. Bitcoin is not, at least at this moment, it's failing, during a time of crisis and has been for quite some time. And I have not seen central banks buy it. So there's been a lot of chatter about governments buying it, but they're not actually doing it. So I don't always listen to the politicians of what they say. It's more what they do. And I think that's where I'm paying attention to right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned the dollar. Yeah, I think what's happening, Josh, is yeah, the dollar is still the best method of payment internationally. But like you said, treasuries are not just treasuries, but all other government bonds, they're losing a lot of value, especially in Japan.
Yeah.
So I think what's going to happen, yes, gold is going to become the underpinning for a new system, in my opinion. And there could be a mixture. People will use dollars for payment, yuan for payment, and euros for payment, but the underlying reserve asset will be gold. And I wanted to show you this chart here because you said at the beginning that you think this is being done by design, and I don't disagree with you. And I've been warning my viewers for the last few years about this chart, these two charts. This is the German, the Reichsmark, value of one gold mark in paper marks in the early 20s and into the hyperinflation of 2023. And this is the chart of gold in US dollars. It's a longer period, but the charts look very similar. And ever since we broke through this, like, let's say, cup and handle, like the top of this line, it's taken off. And I think it could go a lot higher. What do you think about that? Do you think that it's not just the dollar that's going to devalue versus gold, but all fiat currencies?
Oh, yeah, it's a race. It's a race to the bottom, and then they just kind of move at different degrees versus each other. But I think all spenders of pretty much any currency can feel inflation especially over the last 5 years. It doesn't matter if you're in a first world or a third world country, whatever currency you're working with buys a lot less. And so yeah, I think we get moments of time where, if we want to say, if you look at that chart, it was kind of clear 9/11 changed the way economies were working, and that started the printing wheel. And for me, and what I saw during the initial of the grand virus rollout 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, was that they were going to start printing unlike anything we had seen. And I think the U.S. printed what 40% of the money supply in one year, but so did other countries. So that kind of kicked off, and it took a little while to kind of get that digested. And now we're seeing that upswing in gold. So this is it. So if we go back in the last one, 9/11, it took a little bit of time to shake all that out. It didn't stop and look back for a solid decade. So it was basically 10 years. So, it doesn't mean this is going to be the exact playbook. I would say that they kicked the can down the curb, down the road quite a bit in 2011, and we didn't see massive changes. But gold was kind of a boring asset for a number of years. There's no doubt. Now we're in a situation where how far and up and to the right are we going to go? But this time it feels, I would say, change is inevitable. And I say that because it is truly broken. The world is broken. And now that I would say not only is it broken, but there's a challenger to the order of finance, and that is China. China is beating the United States in a number of new categories. I think we can all admit to that. It doesn't mean, and I think in our industry, and I think a lot of people in the gold and silver world, sometimes we root for problems because that helps our finances. But I don't think anyone really wishes chaos on anything. And just like Europe became kind of, let's say, second place to the United States, it doesn't mean that Europe and the United States are going to go away if China takes the throne, but it does mean we're up against a lot of changes. And what does that world look like? And the concerning thing too is more the Chinese state control of money. And I think we're going to watch that unfold with what I would call not, I think we should probably just park CBDCs. That kind of is the bad word. They're now looking there, but they're going into this programmable money, which is very concerning because there are blacklist functions and pause functions and turn off. So if they don't like what you say or do, you can be blacklisted. So, I think, some interesting podcasts. I think Catherine Austin Fitz was just on Tucker Carlson talking about this topic. And so, you mentioned, a lot of these stablecoin companies are that start off as a US dollar stablecoin. They're like, hey, you know what? What if the dollar goes to nothing? Let's throw some gold into it. And now, Tether's got 20 billion in gold in part of their, which represents, I think, in excess of 10% now of their holdings. So are they going to increase that? I think we're watching central banks increase their gold holdings as well. Poland's going to 37% in this calendar year. So this is an interesting topic to look at. And then I think consumers should also be paying attention to, are they going to get trapped into a system? Netherlands just announced, hey, we're going to tax unrealized gains. What is that going to do? How is this? We just start thinking about it. It's not even a tax anymore. It's a confiscation. And this is game changing. And what will happen is capital flight, is capital will go where it's treated best. And I think we did see that early on in the digital realm. Capital was fleeing the United States under the previous SEC regime. And I think Trump, well, the prices haven't performed very well. I think he wants to say, hey, we need to keep the capital here because if not, it's going to leave. So it's going to be very interesting. I think, or do citizens win in any jurisdiction? These a lot of concerns to watch. No one's trusting each other right now, and I think we should have. And frankly, it's probably healthy to distrust just about anything we are told, including what we're watching right now.
Yeah,
On the
yeah.
screen.
I know there's a saying that the first victim of war is the truth. So it's really, you need to be really discerning. And I guess you agree with me that one way to protect your savings, your wealth in these uncertain times is to probably do what the governments are doing, get some physical gold and silver uh, with very little counterparty risk. And I said silver, so maybe we could, conclude our interview with talk a little bit about silver because up until a year ago, silver was what, 25 to $35. And now it's around 80. It's been to 120. And I've been hearing from really good sources that even central banks now are buying silver. And you also recently said that, and you also said that you're seeing corporates buying physical silver, which is really interesting because I've always been a bit of a silver bug as well, and I love my silver coins, the old silver coins, and I always thought it's not just industrial, but it's money. So maybe you could tell me what you're
Yeah,
seeing in the
yeah,
silver
yeah.
space.
I mean, silver historically has been a monetary metal alongside gold. I mean, whether think Rome, think even before then, and even in the United States until the '60s, some of the coins were 90% silver. So we've kind of been in a what Nixon was 71. He cut the final tie for gold. You weren't allowed to own gold bullion in the United States. And that kind of rocks people's minds. What do you mean you couldn't own it? Well, because that was competing with the US dollar. So the 50-ish, 55-year experiment now, I think we're watching it. It's unraveling. So silver has been, I would say this, it's such an industrial metal. It's so critical. The U.S. government put it on its critical mineral list. And I think we're watching that, whether that's missile systems, sonar, various electronics, computer chips, AI. Silver is definitely needed. The military had a strategic stockpile that it ran out. It depleted completely just over 20, 25 years ago now. And so now is it building it back up? And probably. And now are other governments now looking at silver, not so we know for a fact they are buying it for strategic manufacturing reasons. But some are now looking at it and considering, I think even Poland is considering looking at it as a treasury asset. So whether that, I don't think it's not as good of a monetary metal because on the industrial side, we need it for industry. So money that you need to use in some sort of manufacturing, that's not the best form of money. And that's why gold is the ultimate alpha. But if we look at historical ratios between gold and silver, they're not at these levels. And frankly, they come out of the ground. Silver comes out of the ground at 8 to 1, and now it's being consumed more than it is gold. And what I'm watching, because my company supplies bullion dealers and banks all over the world, I'm watching what took place, I think, over the last 6 months in silver is it's now being viewed as precious in a lot of cultures again. So let's take Southeast Asia. They were predominantly just gold buyers because silver's just, who wants it? It's cheap. I mean, 20 years ago, silver in the US was 6, 7, $8. So, but now as we're going higher, it's being viewed more as a precious metal. And so I think now you're kind of awakened to there's new middle classes in China that didn't exist 10 years ago. And now they're very vibrant middle class. And so they have discretionary income that maybe the Europeans and the US don't quite have. And so now they're center stage, I think, in this. So yeah, silver at the end of the day is being viewed as an asset to diversify, similar to how gold has been. So it's definitely something to watch.
And do you think central banks are going to start, or not again, because I'm not sure in the past if they held a lot of silver, but uh, the higher the price goes of silver, the more interesting it becomes to hold. It's not as bulky. Do you think that's going to happen, or it's going to be more like individuals and maybe corporations?
I well, so Russia 1 year ago put out that they're reviewing it. Saudi Arabia has been buying it. Poland's central bank is looking at it. I think the trend is your friend. So
Yeah.
these players were not in it at all. So it doesn't take much to step up. And I mean, I've been covering, in my vaulting operation, the state of Wyoming, who's got out of one fund, they have 33 billion. They're starting to buy physical gold. And my vaulting operation was chosen over JP Morgan. U.S. states, and it's not just Wyoming. Utah bought quite a bit last year, and now you've got other states with bills. They're looking at, and some of these states in the United States are bigger than entire European nations. So what happens when they start entering the arena to buy physical metal? It's going to impact it. And so I would say the same thing with silver. What happens when anyone starts? It's just the demand, when you have more people buying it, it's quite interesting. And what is wild, especially about, if you think about gold and why is it going up? I talk about the hidden hand. The hidden hand are the central bankers buying because they have the right to print fiat currency out of thin air and buy a hard asset. Well, what an amazing thing to own. There is no other investment like that. You can't just buy land and governments are printing fake money to make your real estate go up. You have to wait on, typically the private industry to do it. And so I think we have a very unique opportunity that I think the rest of the world still has not woken up to it. And, people even look at 5,000. And I think at some point, I got to be careful with an asterisk because I don't know the future exactly, but the chance of 5,000 looking like a steal of the century could be like when I was looking at gold, even when I first got into the industry, it was 250. Here we are at 5,000, if you look at certain debt ratios, I've been covering it, calling it the Phair Sinclair ratio. Jim Sinclair was one of the largest precious metals traders, over the last, 50 plus years, and he's no longer with us, but I used to fly to see him just to listen to him. And he was a big inspiration to get me into this space, to be in the metals industry. And so that ratio, which you can ask Grok, what is the Phair Sinclair, my last name, what does the ratio look like, and where does that take gold? And so that ratio is at 35,000 for gold.
Yeah, I think he did that calculation in the early 70s because I I've spoken to Peter Carlin, who wrote A Pocketbook of Gold with Jim Sinclair. And
Yeah.
the way he calculated it was he took the U.S. Treasury debt held by foreigners.
Foreign. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a quarter of that, quarter backing or 40% backing. And in the early 70s, he came up with $900. And gold went to 887.50. He always used to
Yep.
talk about that number. And I used to follow his blog, JS Mindset. I started following back in '02 when I first bought some gold. Yeah, so it's very interesting. And I think, Josh, what's happening now is that the last 55 years has been an aberration, really, uh, in the sphere of money. And we're just going back to normal, but very few people realize it. And that's what I've been trying to do here on this channel for the last 10 years, warn that that's the way we're going because having a fiat currency as a major reserve currency, it's never gonna last forever.
Uh, I think you're right. And you're not going to really get the content, from mainstream media. Although they're waking up. I'm getting some very interesting news calls just in the last 30 days. They are paying attention to it, whether or not they're going to publish everything, from some really big publications. But it's channels like yourself that bring out good content. You do good interviews. It's none of us know exactly everything's going on, but we provide different insights from different points of view. And at the end of the day, we just have to use critical thinking, which they don't teach in most of the schools anymore. And that's what's kind of been fun, kind of being, I would say, being more active in social media over the last, 13, 14 months now, is just kind of being able to talk with folks like yourself, and it kind of sharpens the mind, and to watch what's happening. And, frankly, it starts, the world events around us start to make more sense when you have a different mindset.
Well,
Hence
Josh,
the name Jim Sinclair mindset.
yeah, mindset. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Josh, it was really great to speak with you, and yeah, we'll have to keep in touch and talk again in the future.
Yeah. Appreciate it. It was fun to connect.